Explain a podcast to a caveman.
Oh, God. Oh. Well, I actually researched this because I thought, and by the way, I say I researched this just completely on my own because I had no idea this was going to be a thing. So Adam didn't tell me ahead of time. But I can tell you what the word comes from.
But that's cheating.
Well, sometimes, you have to cheat in order to get by. So I...
Very good. Good to know.
But I swear I didn't cheat. Pod comes from iPod and cast is broadcast. So it was the first podcast was on an iPod.
Oh,
and
really?
And the difference between broadcast, which I think means it's supposed to be live, and podcast is it was made for an iPod, so you could listen to it tomorrow or the next day as opposed to live radio broadcasting.
So how long's the podcast been around?
I think 20 years. Maybe
20 years.
Well,
that doesn't
YouTube,
feel right. Where's the
YouTube just I know it's not the same, but YouTube just had their 20th anniversary.
Yeah, I know, but
crazily.
YouTube's that's not
similar.
Not podcasts, is it?
Okay, well, fine, 15 years.
Like
it's got to be around 15 years.
Maron does a podcast, and he's like one of the podfathers.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to become a podfather.
Okay.
And I think that's longer than 20 years ago.
It's debated when the first one started.
Oh, okay. So it's debated. So you think 20 years ago? I'm going to
say 20 years.
I'm going to say, I want to hedge my bets now. iPods.
Yeah.
I'm going to say 26 years ago, first podcast. So when you said you researched it, obviously your research stopped at the first line of Wikipedia or something.
Pretty much, yeah. So the question
that's
is...
good, because we're not supposed to know anything.
Well, and I didn't know this was our topic. So the question,
that was
though,
interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm glad I could teach you something, which has been our whole relationship. So the... no, but the question is, we have to explain what a podcast is. So what is a podcast, Jolene?
I think it's somebody with a sort of overlarge, inflated selfie impression of themselves who wants people to hear their voices. No, it must have started as an interview platform.
I'm going to say, if I had to define it...
I think long-form interviews is where I would define it.
Okay, see, I wouldn't define it as long-form interviews, only because I think that's the most popular style of podcast. I think a podcast is technically the definition audio, even though I know a lot of podcasts are on YouTube and stuff now, but I would say it's audio entertainment that is not broadcast live.
Yes, it's not broadcast live. It's the crucial thing. In terms of the definition of when podcasts started, the first podcast existed before the word podcast existed. Because it was a broadcast that wasn't broadcast as a broadcast, if that makes sense.
It was a broadcast that wasn't done live.
Yeah, so it was recorded and then played.
I mean...
So that must have been...
But you could say radio plays if you can record them. The first time you could record it and play it later, technically that would be a podcast.
Yeah. But do you think I think that's fascinating that the form that we think of it now and what you're doing is I would say pretty new.
Brilliant.
But a little bit, but it's now just part of everybody's... Do you think that's amazing that it's now just literally part of everybody's sort of day?
So we have 1 minute. Well, I think we've defined it. I think we've done a pretty good job.
I think the problem with this is I assume that you're not very intelligent. And so what's happened is you actually knew all about it. I know absolutely nothing apart from the fact that I listened to them.
Are we cavemen explaining to each other, or is one of us a caveman explaining to the other person?
I think if you arrived with a caveman and they were like, hey, what's a podcast? I think you've nailed it. I think I'd be in trouble.
Well, the problem is the caveman probably wouldn't know
what radio broadcast is.
I was going to say.
Well, they're obviously ahead of the game. As cavemen.
It's like an alien coming down and going, they wouldn't necessarily
well, it's not called Explain It to an Alien, though, is it? It's called Explain It to a Caveman.
Is our time up?
No, you got 10 seconds.
Oh, my God.
Okay, my name's Jody, and you can find me on...
Follow me on Instagram. Smash that like and subscribe button.
1, done.
Oh, there's the bell.
It was 2003.
2003.
20 years, 22 years.
22 years, yeah. But it was called Open Radio Source.
But you should say that. That should be in the bit.
Well, this could be.
I know, but our time's up, so we can't use it.
Extra. This is extra.
So it's 2003.
2003, but it wasn't a podcast. The term podcast.
And what was it? Who was it?
It was a man called Christopher Lydon, who basically recorded radio and opened it up to open source so people could download radio shows onto their iPods and then listen.
Chrissy Lydon. Yeah. In 2003.
The term didn't exist
until
2004.
I think we did brilliantly because I think we split it right in the middle.
You
surface from the underground at Piccadilly Circus.
Mind the gap.
Making your way through the glittering lights of London's West End, you take a turn down a quaint-looking street into the notorious neighborhood of Soho. The lights are up, the crowd is buzzing, and yes, you just stepped into the best seat in the house. Welcome to The Big Smoke, a variety show podcast. I'm Kevin Bennett, and I'll be your guide through this experience of comedy, conversation, and community. This week's journey through the Big Smoke is a little different than our usual ventures. Today, we gazeth upon the navel. With so many quirky and curious elements in our show, the team thought it was high time you met the ringleader of this delightful circus, me! So, to kick things off, our trusty assistant producer Adam turns the mic around and interviews your host. Yes, that's me. Naturally, after all that introspection, we thought we better check in with our doctor. So, off we go to visit Dr. Quack, only to find him at a career crossroads, attending a tribunal for his rather dubious treatment of the Earl of Kent. And to top it all off, we introduce you to the first Victorian parlor game I ever played, Poor Pussy. But first, please welcome assistant producer Adam Wright and, well, yours truly.
Hi Kevin, welcome to The Big Smoke. This is a little weird. I'm not normally on the microphones at all, and you're normally in my seat doing the questions, and this time...
Well, thanks for having me. Even though I just introduced myself and made everybody clap for me.
Yeah.
But it's great to be here, and this is going to be an unusual experience, but I'm really looking forward to be quite literally in the other seat, receiving the questions.
Yeah.
I have not had any prep for this. I don't know what this is going to be about. We thought it might be interesting for people to know kind of where the show comes from and why all the different aspects of the variety show are there. So here we go.
Now, new listeners of the show might know a couple of facts about you, so I'm just going to reel off a couple of things to give a kind of a base layer of context for new listeners and old listeners and people who've maybe not been paying attention so much.
Know you.
Exactly. So a lightning round of Kevin Bennett trivia.
Okay.
So I have it written down.
I can't wait to hear this.
So you're Canadian.
That is true.
You're from Vancouver or nearby Vancouver?
I'm from, I was born in the suburbs of Vancouver, so I say I'm from Vancouver.
Yeah. And you were a theatre director, working in a lot of different countries and places across the world, taking shows around the world and stuff like that.
True. And some might say I still am a theatre director at times.
Who are
depends
those?
Depends on the day you catch me.
Depends on who those people are.
Yeah.
And you live in London now.
I do. I live right. It's pretty difficult to get more central. But when I moved here, I didn't really. I don't know. I had a friend who knew someone in this building, and so I am smack dab in the middle of Soho.
Classic.
Yeah.
Classic tourist coming to live in London, going right in the middle.
I know. Someone told me once that I live, because I was like, the closest stations to me is Tottenham Court Road and Leicester Square or something like that.
Wow.
And Piccadilly Circus. They're like, you basically live on the Monopoly board. I was like, I'm like...
You're just playing it with your parents once and you were like, I want to live there.
It's allowed. It's just, again, I didn't choose the area. I think I was very intimidated when I moved to London of like, how am I going to find a place? So the first place that someone said, I'm basically friends with the building manager or whatever, I was like, that's it. I'm taking it. I'm going.
My first question, theatre.
Ask me anything.
Directing. What was it specifically about directing theatre that kind of drew you in? Because I've read a lot of your reviews. I've read a lot of your kind of correspondences with actors and stuff to when you talk about directing. And I thought there's a really fascinating insight into a role that, I will be honest, I don't entirely understand. I think directing is a little bit of a black box for me because I can see the result of a direction, but I wouldn't know where to start with the direction, how it differs from other roles in the production process. So back to the question of kind of what was it about that kind of role that drew you in, and what does it mean to you?
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to make this answer not the entire 45 minutes because there's a lot of different ways to go about it. But in terms of why theater directing. So first of all, growing up, my dad was and still is a program director. So that was his job for radio, music radio. So I give that context because it's a very similar type of job to being a theater director or an artistic director of a theater company. So I was around the atmosphere of kind of showbiz, entertainment, media kind of thing. And the role that I was around was, he started on air, but very quickly moved to kind of management positions, strategizing, overseeing, coaching performers and talent and things like that. So that would be the origin of kind of being interested in a leadership position. When I was a kid, I was very much a performer, school plays, musicals, all of those types of things. And I think I struggled a bit to figure out if, basically I spent a lot of time wondering, should I be an actor? Should I be a director? I didn't really think I could do more than one thing. For whatever reason, there was a time when I was a teenager that I was like, I have to figure out what it is that I'm doing. But, I floated around. I was like, maybe I'll direct movies, maybe I'll, all these different things. And then basically what it comes down to is when I was 14. Now, at that point, I'd already done tons of performing and I wanted to act and I loved comedy films, and like Jim Carrey was one of my heroes. He's Canadian and obviously done a million comedic movies that I thought were great as a kid and things like that. But around the time I was a teenager was just a difficult time in terms of figuring out who I am and my sexuality and my identity and dealing with bullying at school and all these different things. And so I wasn't this aware of it at the time, but I spent the year of my grade 9, so I was like 14 turning 15, with this really strong desire to know what I want to be. Like, what's my destiny? What's my career? What's my job? And I did this funny thing where I sort of auditioned different things. So I'd already been a part of performing my whole childhood, from my dad's radio career to I used to audition for films and TV. I didn't really get anything, but then I performed in school plays and all that kind of stuff. But I spent the entire grade 9 year researching different careers. And it was everything from lawyer to driving the BC ferries, which is a giant boat that goes across part of the Pacific Ocean to get to Vancouver Island, to piloting float planes, to being a lawyer, to being a symphony conductor. And, I did everything. Somehow through my dad's connection, I got to sit in on a symphony rehearsal for the day and have lunch with the conductor, who was amazing and a lovely person. And it was such a cool experience. So it's kind of auditioning these different careers. And then during that time, again, I had this, I think because I was struggling emotionally in other parts of my life, I was like, I need to have a goal. I need to have a thing to attach myself to. I went to a play at the Vancouver Playhouse downtown in Vancouver, professional production of a play called Stones in His Pockets by Mary Jones. And what's really interesting, I can literally remember that moment thinking, I'm going to be a theater director. And it was because I felt something as an audience member that I never felt performing. I loved performing and all of these things, but I think the combination of my own emotional struggle and then going into the audience of that play, watching a story and a very funny play, but at times it got really dark as well. But it had nothing to do with me. It was set in Ireland, about a big Hollywood movie that was being filmed in this small town. So I couldn't connect to the content, but the emotional weight of how the actors were performing, it felt like I understood that pain. And in that moment, I just remember on the ride home on the SkyTrain, which is the tube in Vancouver basically, but it's up in the sky, I thought to myself, this is it. I'm going to be a theater director. And I've come in and out of it in various ways. But yeah, so that's the origin of why I wanted to do that job, because I wanted to create the experience I had in the audience, which was I learned that I wasn't alone in my suffering, that everybody suffers. And if you learn that someone else is suffering too, it makes it a little bit better. And that was really pivotal for me personally at that point. And so I thought, that's what I need to do. That's my sort of destiny.
So is it that, I'm just interested in that kind of, that experience of the show that you were at, Stones in His Pockets?
Yeah, Stones in His Pockets.
And just the interface between you experiencing that and kind of that emotional release turmoil that you kind of made that connection with the work, even though it wasn't not related to you directly at all. And I just think it's really interesting that you then, your speciality kind of became Shakespeare, and you worked on Shakespeare because obviously Shakespeare is a English playwright who lived 600 years ago, 400 years ago. And I just think it's really interesting that, so am I right in assuming that you found that connection in Shakespeare? Was it with Shakespeare Was it like a straight away you got it like that and you kind of knew this is something I'm really interested in doing, or was it kind of maybe more you wanted to be a director and Shakespeare plays are, a really challenging thing to direct and you kind of went that way into it, or was it the emotional connection first?
Yeah. I had no connection to Shakespeare at that point. So the stones in his pocket part of my journey was with that struggle. I was 14 and I did Shakespeare in school in English class like everybody does. Yeah. And I didn't get it. I didn't feel smart enough. I was a pretty average student in terms of grades and things like that. But I also just was pretty average in terms of I didn't really try that hard and things like that. I didn't care about school unless it was drama class, which I loved. So Shakespeare didn't come until basically through this whole journey of wanting to be a director. There was a small part of me that thought at one point, a few years later, am I scared of the vulnerability of performing, and is directing more safe? And I've been thinking about this. This leads to the Shakespeare question. But basically, this is where I was doing a lot of back and forth. Like, as soon as I graduated high school, I spent way more time than you probably should, just with turmoil over, should I do acting? Should I do directing? Should I do acting? Should I do directing? And because there was something inside of me that it was like I was a performer as a kid. And then through this struggle when I was 14, which for context is like the time I was discovering that I'm gay but I didn't really know, or I did and I didn't, and all of these complicated things were happening. And I can sort of psychoanalyze now that time where I was obsessed with finding a career as I needed something to hold on to, right? So I discovered directing, and then a couple years later, I'm thinking of pursuing it. And I went to this university, which kind of had a directing speciality course. But then something wasn't right. Like, it didn't feel like it fit when I got there. I was like, it didn't feel intense enough. I wanted a really, like a conservatory style school, which was really intense is the only word I can think of, but really difficult. Like really, really sort of, I don't just mean like good versus bad quality. I mean like they worked us hard. I wanted to work hard. I wanted to really like learn. So I left that school that I went to after high school. I was only there for a couple months. And I was like, I think I need to pursue, I had a little blip where I was like, I'm going to go and do acting. So anyways, I get into Studio 58, which is the drama school that I went to, which ended up being in Vancouver. So I'm back in Vancouver now, starting this 3-year program as an actor. And I did the first year as the conservatory actor training. Still, the voice in the back of my head wasn't sure. Again, I wasn't thinking at the time that I could do, it wasn't that I wasn't thinking I could do more than one thing. It was that I think I had this obsession of being the best at one thing. And I think it relates to my insecurities at the time when I was 14. So it's like, I need to be the top of the world in something. It was like the Band-Aid to the pain of being a teenager and stuff like that. So anyways, here I am in drama school as an actor. And then I flip-flopped again after the first year. And I directed this show in a little theater in Vancouver just on my own, kind of put it together. And some of the teachers came. And one of them who ran the school said, I think you're more of a director, actually. And I was like, okay. So here I am flip-flopping again. So I sort of switched programs. Right. And I was really lucky. The school let me basically create a directing program. They didn't have a directing program. Oh, wow. So they created with me, and I was mentored by the head of the school, who was a professional director. But basically what that meant is I got to take some of the acting courses and some of the design courses and some of the stage management courses. So I got a bit of everything. And as a director, you kind of need to know a little bit about all the different people that you're working with. So during that time, the original founder of the school, who at the time was in his late 80s, he had long since retired, was brought back to direct a production of The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. And not only direct it, he was going to play Shylock. He was 87, 88. It was crazy. So they said, do you want to be his assistant? But it wasn't just assistant directing, like working on the script and things that an assistant director would normally do on the play. It was like literally in the intermission, he wanted to have his pulse checked.
Oh, wow. Because he's...
To make sure he wasn't dead? I have no idea. I think it was to make sure it wasn't irregular or whatever.
Well, bless him.
I actually didn't end up doing that job because I was like, I don't have first aid training. Yeah. So we got someone in the cast named Ben, who is a lovely person who was like, I can do that. I've done first aid.
Wow.
But yeah, so there was a lot. It was kind of like he fell asleep between scenes. It was just a crazy experience. But the thing about it was, so when he spoke the text of Shakespeare, it was like he was speaking modern text. I completely got it. He was so good at it and had such ease. So when I heard that, I thought, wow, this thing that seemed impenetrable. I'd seen some Shakespeare plays. I never understood them, all this kind of stuff. Didn't feel like I understood it in English class. I thought, oh, I get it. I get it now when he does it. And so it was that combined with this obsession that I had, which was I need to be, really it's my ego, I guess, at the time was like, I need to be the best at something. So I think I was like, I'm going to do Shakespeare because it's really hard. It'll make me a better director. And if I specialize in that, it's even more niche. And I can be the king of that castle in a way.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's like ego motives, and then there's sort of the pure, I guess, artistic motive of like, I fell in love with the fact that he did it and he made me understand it, and I love the puzzle of it. But then there's also the sort of like ego that's trying to protect me and wants me back to the 14-year-old to be the best at something.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that I think it's always been in me to perform, and to like, that's just always been who I am. I had like 100 stuffed animals when I was a kid, and I used to put on shows and play pretend and all of this stuff. I used to dress up. Like, there's pictures of me. For whatever reason, I was obsessed with dressing up as Mother Goose from the time I was like 2 or 3. And there's pictures of me in like my mom's giant high heels and lipstick and a purse and everything. Every day I would dress up. That was the thing. So it's always been with me, but based on what was going on in my life, it put on different clothes.
Yeah.
For a while it was Shakespeare. For a while it was directing, you know. It's always been different things, but I think deep down it's the same thing.
Yeah. I think that brings us really well onto the Globe. You got a directing job at the Globe after doing a few productions in Canada of, I don't know if they were all Shakespeare, but and then you got this exciting opportunity to work at the Globe. To tell us a little bit about how that happened, because the Globe is one of those institutions where it's like, I don't know, it's just so like high society, for lack of a better word, and it's so kind of fascinating and interesting to, you know, you've got to get Shakespeare to do the Globe.
Well,
you know?
you kind of learn about it in school. It's like, where did Shakespeare work? At this place called the Globe, and there's all these myths about it. And then you realize, oh, there's a Globe now, and it's not the original Globe, but it's kind of a reconstruction pretty much in the same spot. So there's two answers to this again. There's the kind of ego desire to be the best in the world at something. And then there's the pure thing, which is there's something about the way that the architecture of that theater works that I fell in love with. So before I went to drama school, but after high school, I came to London for the first time for about a month and a half, about 5 weeks. I'd saved up all my money that year, working part-time jobs and things, and I stayed in a hostel, and I went to a play almost every day. I went to 31 or 32 plays in 35 days.
Wow.
Madness. That way madness lies. But I just loved it. I didn't want to do anything else. And so I learned a lot. And about 5 or 6 of them were at the Globe. Never even knew the Globe existed, but it was £5. And I went, and I was like, and at that point I didn't really get Shakespeare yet. I hadn't been to drama school and had that 88-year-old teacher doing Merchant of Venice. But I stood in the yard. About half the audience stands, and it's £5. They're kind of replicating what it was in Shakespeare's day. If anyone hasn't been there or doesn't know who's listening. And there was something that I felt akin to the Stones in His Pockets experience that I talk about, which was a moment of connection during the production. And it was a play called Coriolanus, which is not even one of his well-known or famous ones. It's a Roman play. And to be honest, I don't even remember much about what it's about. But I remember there was a moment when he got killed, and everybody's standing in what's called the yard around the stage, and some actors had sort of snuck in without me realizing it, and then they like threw him when he got stabbed or killed in the play, the main character Coriolanus, into the yard. And suddenly we became like this mosh pit, and they were stabbing him and killing him, and it was this kind of like all of a sudden the play exited the fourth wall and we were in it. And then at one point someone lifted up their hand and was like, "Rah!" And they had in their hand like a very realistic looking human heart.
Wow.
And then they threw the body on the stage and took him away. And it was like this crazy scene. And I was like, I'm in this play. I'm in the crowd.
Yeah.
It was so wild. And so that was that moment of connection where I thought, it's not even Shakespeare. I was like, this is what theater is. Being a part of it, being in this space. And you know, because the Globe is a replica of a 400-year-old theater, they had no electricity, so there's no roof over the middle. They use the sunlight. So it just felt really connected to the people, the story, the actors, and the audience in that round building felt really connected. So that became kind of my obsession. And then when I forward fast now to the bit that I've already talked about, which is I'm at Studio 58, and I have this teacher, suddenly I go, oh, and now I understand Shakespeare. So those two things combined made me go, I got to get there. That's like the Mecca. That became my, if anyone's read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, it's a beautiful book. And he's on this journey for this treasure and he doesn't know, he just knows it's at the pyramids or something like that. That became my pyramids and my treasure. I was like, I got to get there. Now, I preface this by saying there's an ego bit of this, which is that's the most famous, Shakespeare theater in the world. And I had an ego and was like, I want to be the best. Yeah. So it was sort of, it's not that any of that is bad, but I always feel like there's sort of the earnest drive, but I'm not going to pretend that it also wasn't like, I want to be the best, So there's both of those things were part of it. So I had been doing Shakespeare in Canada. I had no idea how that was going to happen. And then through a series of events, I became an assistant director at the Stratford Festival in Ontario, which was our big Canadian theater festival. So that really helped because that's quite a well-known theater company. And then while I was there was this, it was like sent from the heavens, basically. There was an award that they announced that you had to apply for this award, though. And it was for one Canadian young director to be an assistant director at the Globe. There were some Canadians who'd been involved in building the replica of the Globe, so they had raised some money. So basically, I was like, that's mine. And I will Richard III my way through anyone and who...
You did.
And I did. So I won that. I applied and I won that award, which that sent me to work there. And then I had kept my relationship since then. And through them, I've been able to travel around the world and do Shakespeare in other places, teaching and directing. And it opened a lot of doors. But also, it's really the reason I live in London, because I made friends and really a beautiful network of people that made me feel like, I think I could build a life here in London. But that's how that journey began.
That's amazing. In the episode with Giles Torreira a couple episodes ago, you talk about going to China and doing a production in China. I thought it was really interesting. And you were talking about the kind of the culture, I don't know if the right word is shock, but like just the differences in when was this?
So this was the second year. So the first year at the Globe was just in London. And then again, it was like fate. The show that I worked on, they decided to do a tour around the world, and a month of that tour was in China. Amazing. So this was 2016, right? Almost 10 years ago.
So it's just how different the cultures are, and having, Giles was saying how like the apps you use on your phone just didn't work there. And he spoke of this powerful experience of seeing these people who don't speak English watching a production and then connecting, or he connected with a production that wasn't in English, that he couldn't understand what they were saying, but he still connected with that moment. And I just think that's a really fascinating. Did you find that people came to the shows where you took them around the world, not just in China, but did you find that they connected with the same bits that maybe a more English speaking audience would have? I guess what I'm asking is, were the connection points with the narrative the same despite a language barrier? Or did you find that there was a bit more, they connected with another moment where maybe there's less dialogue and stuff like that?
So this could be a whole podcast in and of itself, but basically this was one of the gifts that I hold dear to my heart of pursuing. Wherever my career goes in my life, I will always look back at this as a huge gift, because when I started thinking I'm going to be a director or I'm going to do Shakespeare or any of these things, I had no idea that I would get to travel around the world. And I also had no idea what that would mean, because it's one thing to go on a trip to Thailand or wherever, and that's amazing. And I love that. And I've done that. But to be given the task to either bring an English production to another country that's so different from the UK or Canada or anywhere I'd been, or because another thing I've done is I've gone and made work. I did a production of Romeo and Juliet in Mandarin with Chinese actors. Wow. But anyways, in terms of the question of audience connecting points, so it's a really complex thing that I wouldn't want to claim to be a full expert on. But translation became so fascinating and complicated. So it was an English production, but there were Mandarin surtitles projected above the stage that people could read. And I think a lot of people came because it's Shakespeare and it's the Globe, and it was, it's like the circus comes to town in a way. We were the circus. We were the sort of like the Shakespearean actors, all this stuff. And it's a really interesting thing. Just like if Chinese opera comes here or something, I go, that's really different. I'm going to go experience that. But of course, in China, they're not raised with Shakespeare. They're not raised... Again, I don't want to speak with pretending that I have the full knowledge of what their experience is like, but they're not raised with the same kind of Western history that we are, even just something like the Holocaust. I'm not saying they don't know what that is, obviously, but I, growing up in school in Canada, didn't learn about all the Chinese historical events, or if I learned about them, they were like a blip in the day's lesson
in history,
as opposed to like you spend a whole week on the Holocaust or whatever. So there was a different connection to the Christian-Jewish conflict, which is in The Merchant of Venice. And so in the first week, it was really difficult because the audience responded to Shylock, the Jewish character, like he was a villain. And it felt like there wasn't an understanding of his humanity. Right. At one point, he gets spat on and the audience applauded.
Wow.
And in New York, where we had been just before that, the audience gasped.
Yeah.
The question I started asking was, are we telling the story we think we're telling? And it doesn't mean we change it because I can't force you to have the reaction. You're going to have the reaction you're going to have. But I can question whether I'm communicating what I think I'm communicating. Yeah. So therein began a journey of me working with the translators really closely for that first week. And I just discovered subtle but profound things. There's one part where Shylock, the main character's daughter, runs away with a young Christian boy and they steal. First of all, she runs away. Secondly, they steal a bunch of his money and his wife, who it alludes to, has passed away. They steal a ring from her. From him that he was saving. And it's a really sad moment. And he has this line where he goes, "My daughter, my ducats." Ducats is the money at the time in Venice. "My daughter, my ducats, my daughter, my ducats." And he says something like, there, a diamond gone cost me 2,000 ducats in Frankfurt. And he's just kind of going all over the place. And when he said there, they laughed. And I thought, this is weird. So I went through the translation and I went to that exact moment and I asked the translator, or it wasn't the translator, it was someone who was working with us, but who was working with the translation so they could, have the ability to change it if we needed to. I said, what's happening in that moment? Because in the English version, he's upset about his money and he's upset about the jewels and the diamond from his wife, and he's upset about his daughter. It isn't, in my mind, Shakespeare leaning into the trope of money grubbing, greedy Jewish character, which other plays at the time maybe did. And there are certain tropes, of course, that, it's a complicated play.
Yeah.
But I don't think that moment is that. I don't think that moment is as one-dimensional as that. So the translation, instead of being "my daughter, my ducats, there, a diamond gone," was something like shit, my money. "My daughter, shit, my money." Yeah. And so I explained to the translator and they went, okay, let me try something else that's closer to what you're talking about, which is what I think Shakespeare does well, which is find the gray area. And of course, the laughter went away. Wow. So that was one example of a really profound moment where I was like, communication, story, culture. I'm not an expert in Chinese culture or that audience, which was in Guangzhou, but it really felt like an honor to be able to have that as a puzzle that I had to work on. Yeah. I was the associate director of that production. So that means that I worked with the director, but the director didn't go on tour. So I was in charge of essentially mounting it in every city and then making sure that it was being communicated, and any little tweaks like that to the translation or things like that were kind of my remit.
Amazing. So moving on kind of in the same vein, but off Shakespeare more directly. You've lived in the UK for a while now. And you've traveled the world. I just wanted to ask, as a more personal question, like your family live in Canada, just that kind of distance is very difficult in the kind of in a socioeconomic climate of this fear about migration and the rhetoric around that kind of stuff, and just that physical distance. I just wondered how you've experienced that, how you found, because fundamentally what I understand from the kind of the story that we've woven so far is this desire for connection with a story, but also connection with others through a story. Kind of if you break it down to a very kind of simplified level. Did you find that connection in the UK initially through the stories in theatre, and how easy did you find that, and how is maintaining that connection with your parents at home? As a bit of a multifaceted question.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, there's a couple things. One, as much as and anyone who listens to the podcast or knows me will know that I rail against phones and modern technology and social media. There's a lot of things about that I despise, but I'm really grateful to be in the era we're in, because when I first came to London, it was 2006. I had a flip phone. I had to get a calling card. I couldn't communicate basically for 5 weeks.
Calling card.
Adam's a bit younger than me.
It
was like an international, you bought it at a store and then you like punched the number into your phone and it gave you the amount of, a certain amount of minutes of international
just like
calling.
half an hour of a call and you...
Yeah, but it was for international.
Right.
So I had my Canadian phone and then I bought a calling card. Anyways.
Wow.
So I'm grateful to
just
live
in age you, just real quick.
Yeah, thanks. I just turned 37, if anyone's curious. So I'm not that old. But anyways, so I'm grateful we live in the time we live in now because a FaceTime is it's not obviously the same as being in person, but I can do that and it's basically free and it's really fast. And so I have like a great connection with friends and family who are in Canada and other places. I'm also really, really fortunate that I'm able to go to Canada once or twice a year. I have family who at various times come over to visit here. So I'm really lucky and fortunate in that. But, it's difficult. I think it comes and goes. It depends on what I'm doing. I try to manufacture opportunities for connection. So much of this podcast and this show is about that. And it's kind of like my way of finding that, you know. But, London's a big city and weirdly big cities can sometimes feel more isolating than if you're in a smaller city. So London can sometimes feel a bit more lonely just because I think everybody's got their busy lives and it's hard to connect to people if they live on the other side of town or whatever. I don't know if that answers your question, but basically that's it. All I have to say.
No, that moves us on very nicely to where I want to go now. So yeah, I just want to talk about that, the idea of connection, because it's one of our 3 pillars on the show, and we have a section called Parish Notices
and Community
as part of it. And first of all, let's start with Parish Notices as a feature, because I think that's one of the it's one of the anchor bits of the show. It's one of the ones we try to include every single time because it's kind of to the essence of what we're trying to do with this show. And I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about why.
So you mentioned the 3 pillars. So the 3 pillars are comedy, conversation, and community. And there's a segment that's called Parish Notices, which is essentially the community pillar. But the community pillar kind of can go through a lot of the different segments, but basically under the umbrella, the main one is Parish Notices. Is the question why that's there?
Yeah, kind of why it's there, but also like why it's the one that's always
core
there.
Pillars.
I
mean, this goes back to a few different places. If we go back to theater and my work as a director and Shakespeare and the Globe and all these different things, I've always thought that theater historically is a place where the entire community comes together. For example, at the Globe, you'd have the nobility in the expensive boxes and you'd have the poorest of the poor paying, 1 penny to get into the standing area. So I was always like, theater through history was a community act. Sometimes there's professional actors, or ancient Greek theater had lots of community members involved in the chorus and things like that. Yeah. And it feels like it was a connection point, almost like maybe religion or other things were like, it was a part of people's lives. And, the further you go back with storytelling and theater, the more of a kind of ritual and religious experience it was in a way. And so one of my things as a theater director was we need to try to remedy this because the audience is just the way the economy works with theater tends to be sort of one bracket, middle, upper class or whatever, people who can afford to go and it's really expensive. So it was always a big drive of mine. And it connects to me feeling connection and community when I was younger and it was a safe place. So finding a meeting place where someone who is from one background or one age or one life experience and then someone else from a completely different life story to whatever that one was, where they can come together and experience something, even in a podcast where they don't see each other, but it's the same experience, feels really important. And then you can go even further now where we're living in a world where even though we're more and more connected, we're more and more divided. And I'm not the first one to say that. So many people talk about that. So I feel like having a space that is unexpected, is varied, variety show, but is welcoming to many, many different people. And then finally, connection and community, I think, is the most important thing to being a human and surviving. There's research now that says that it's even more important, or at least just as important as like physical fitness and eating well. Connection, community, love, being with people. So Parish Notices is a way to bring that. Yeah. And sometimes it's highlighting community initiatives. Sometimes it's interviewing people on the street to provide ideas for audience members and listeners as to how they might find connection. Just to continue to nudge the world in that direction is what Parish Notices is all about. The name Parish Notices, a parish is like the little village, kind of the neighborhood around a church. Yeah. Has nothing to do with religion other than somebody suggested the title to me when I was like, I need a sort of community segment. And I like the idea of it being almost like it's our little announcements. It's our little notice board. Yeah. You'd see the notice board kind of thing at the church or the community center or the town hall. So Parish Notices is a way for people to bring a little connection and community into their lives.
The reason I wanted to start with Parish Notices is because I think it allows you to get to the wider aspect of it kind of through more precisely, because the show feels like it's exactly that. It's a place that different communities come together to enjoy a variety show and enjoy a variety of different things. And maybe some audience members enjoy some aspects of the variety show more. Maybe they have favourite segments. The mudlarking one is a fan favourite. And I think that gets the Parish Notices part of it, gets to the fundamental of the whole show and gets the whole vision and the idea of bringing people together through theatre. This is not theatre, this is podcast, but it's very, as you would say, theatrical. And I think that is a really powerful aspect of it, which roots back all the way to that initial discussion we were having about finding yourself in a story, again, to simplify it. And whilst this show, there are sometimes stories, there aren't always stories, but finding yourself in that connection with either segments of a show or in interviews, or finding yourself in that connection with the show, but also other people who listen to the show is, I think, the most fascinating part of the show itself. And I think I just talk a little bit about why this podcast was the best way of doing that, because I think it is an excellent way of doing it, and why you were so interested in, after doing all these theatrical performances and, running these shows, why this is the next thing you want to do, because it's a very different type of generating a connection, because it's quite it's not isolated, but obviously, unless people are listening in groups, most people are listening to this on their own, but there's still a connection there, but it's a very different kind of connection from that one you were describing in the Globe, when you were connected with the audience because you kind of became part of the play. And well, there's a couple things that I thought that I wanted to just mention that you made me think of there. One was, we talk about the world becoming more and more connected and then more and more divided, right? Algorithms and everybody's on their phones, but part of that is entertainment as well, and media. And I'm not the first one to say this, but it's like Netflix and all these streaming services. There's so many options out there now. The algorithm is going to send you the thing that it thinks you want. So gone are the days where so many people tune in and watch Friends or whatever the sitcom is, or The Tonight Show is only one of 3 options at 10 or 11 at night, whatever. And those were unifiers in a way. They were the water cooler conversations. So what I want to do is create a kind of an amalgamation of something like the Globe, or a theatrical experience that is smart and artful and community-based and brings people together. But then also the fun of those, my favorite sitcoms and late night TV shows. And I grew up in Canada, but I watched a lot of the Tonight Show, The Late Show, Saturday Night Live, Friends and Frasier and those types of things. Some of those are variety shows, talk shows, sitcoms, but they were unifiers. And so this is a difficult task, though, because we don't live in a world where there's, part of that was there was only so many options. Yeah. There's a great podcast I recommend for anyone listening, other than the Big Smoke Variety Show. This is your only one.
Yeah. No, it's Malcolm Gladwell's, what's his podcast called? Revisionist History. And it's an episode about Will and Grace. And he just does a really amazing comparison, because the person who created Will and Grace, his sister created Orange is the New Black, which was a very, very successful, obviously, Netflix show, and was kind of the beginning of the streaming world. And it just talks about the difference of those two shows, and they're both really revolutionary in their own way. But Will and Grace was obviously a part of the time where there was only so many things on the channel. But anyways, so it's a difficult task to do what we're trying to do, which is we're not copying a late night chat show, but we're using that sort of variety, whether it be vaudeville or late night TV or variety show TV, Carol Burnett, Saturday Night Live. The spirit of that is there's variety. There's something for everyone. in a world that has algorithms that's going to divide people. The next bit, which is why this would be for me the next challenge, the next part of the journey, the next thing I want to create. People might think, as you've said, podcasting is quite different from theater. And how do you go from directing Shakespeare plays to now I'm doing a podcast sort of variety show? The short answer to this is, like many people, COVID made me do a lot of introspection. Lockdown, you couldn't put on a play. And during that introspection, got into therapy, a lot of thinking, a lot of figuring out what is the next step. Do I keep fighting to try to keep doing plays? But back to this thing where, I remember how I said I was struggling with, should I be an actor? Should I be a director? All these things when I was younger. Before I struggled as a teenager and sexuality and identity became such a massive thing, do I hide it? Do I be who I am? All these things. My kind of pure self, I think, was the performer. It was Mother Goose. I dressed up every day, put on my mom's heels and walked around the block, whatever, And there was a part of me that was like, I'm not, without sounding wanky or whatever the proper term is, I can't think of the term, I didn't feel like I was expressing the truest version of myself that I could express. And there's something about my journey coming out, whether it be sexuality or just my life's journey younger and the struggles, and everybody has struggles, but my version of it is I always try with each phase to, it's not even like this highfalutin goal. It just feels like something I have to do to survive, which is to continue to express the truest version of myself that I can. And so I was like, there's something here, but I was like, do I do the whole flip flop again? And do I try to become an actor? Ooh, I don't know. That doesn't feel right. I don't have the desire to go play Hamlet. Like, I directed it and I loved that experience, but there was something kind of performance based. So a couple years after, when things were opening up again after COVID, I took a stand-up comedy course to maybe explore that a bit. It was like a 6-week course that ended in everybody did a 5-minute set for the public. Amazing experience. Didn't necessarily lead me to wanting to suddenly become a stand-up comic, but it reopened something in me that I was like, oh, there's a part of me. When I was a kid in high school, I did the morning announcements every day, which was a thing in the school. Today, the basketball team will be meeting at 4:00 in the big gym or whatever, I grew up around the sort of radio world. I played pretend like I had my own show. And so I was like, there's something here. And that essentially has led to this. I put on a live variety show after I did the comedy because I thought it would be a live show for a while because that was my theater background. I think a combination of everything we've talked about in my theater experience and growing up around audio and radio and being excited about this medium, which is, even though it's been around 10, 15 years or whatever, like it's still, there's so much possibility in it. It's new. But it's popular. Like, a lot of people love podcasts, and also it's accessible.
Yeah.
Go back to the community thing. I want everybody to be able to access this. If you don't have an iPhone or a smartphone, as long as you can access a computer somehow at the library, wherever, you could listen to the show for free. So I wanted to create that space, and then I wanted to be able to kind of bring in my directorial side and experience and love for envisioning a show with this thing that I was tapping into, which was, I guess, performance-based, which is where the hosting and the interviewing and being the sort of face of the show, I guess.
So you're kind of doing both a little bit, aren't you? Because like you are the mastermind behind the show. It's a kind of an extension of your personality, but also you are performing in it in lots of ways. So it's kind of like a culmination of those things, of that kind of journey, I guess.
The thing about it too is, in many ways, it's just all the crazy things going on in my mind or all the different segments and all my interests. I said when I was younger, I wanted to be a symphony conductor, and then I wanted to be a ferry boat driver, and then I wanted to fly float planes and be a lawyer. It's kind of a similar thing. Like, the variety of segments and different things that we have in the show are an extension of what I love and what I'm passionate about. So we've got the one side, which is there's something for everyone. And we hope you come together and you connect over these things, and you find a community, even if it's just listening to the show. Yeah. And the atmosphere of the audio experience gives you that feeling of connection. Or you can engage in other ways. But it's also a lot of my quirky interests and different things that I think I'm gonna I'm going to bring all of these things together. But that's why I loved, when I was younger, I used to watch like The Tonight Show and The Late Show and all these American late night shows that would have an interview with an author, and then they'd have a quirky skit about something random. Then there'd be a musical act, and then there'd be a remote where they'd go onto the street and talk to someone, and you just never knew what you were going to get.
Yeah.
So the spirit of that is in it as well.
Final question from roving reporter Ahmad, who also does the parish notices section normally.
So this is in our team. We have, we should mention, we have an amazing team. Producer who also edits the show, Alex Graham, works on the show behind the scenes. Yourself, assistant producer Adam Wright, doing so much in putting the pieces together. And then we have Ahmed Wanley, who we call our roving correspondent, who's really, he's an incredible guy, and he's really connected to various communities. And so he's the perfect person to bring some of these community initiatives to our audience. So you asked him for a question.
I asked him for a question.
And I don't know what this question is, so I'm going to hear it for the first time.
Let's go.
Right now.
Hey, I guess listeners know me already, but in case there's someone new who just catch up on this episode, my name is Ahmad, the Big Smoke variety show correspondent. But today, I'm flipping the mic around for a second to the host who's usually behind it, Kevin. So dear host, you've been running this podcast for a while now, yeah? But wait, first of all, hats off for that. If your podcast could secretly plant one seed in every listener's heart, what you hope it grows into? A junk of joy, a book of belonging, or maybe just a really nice community potluck? Thank you.
Jungle of Joy?
I love that. It's a beautiful question. I think it would be that moment of that spark, that moment of joy that I felt, that I talk about, whether it be holding up the heart of Coriolanus at the Globe or sitting there in the dark watching stones in his pockets. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be weeping over it, because it might be a moment where you're laughing. It might be a moment where you're intrigued or puzzled or moved, but it would be you're not alone. And it would be that warmth that you feel when you're connected to something greater than yourself.
Yeah.
That would be the seed.
It's amazing. That doesn't rhyme though, so you're going to have to try again.
Well, that's it.
Yeah, that is it. Thank you so much for letting me interview you. I'll scrabble off back to the corner to not be heard of again.
And thank you very much for interviewing me. Fantastic questions, and yeah, it's all good.
Brilliant.
Until next time on The Big Smoke.
I'm feeling a tad funny after all that introspection. I think it might be time for a visit to the doctor. Wandering through the streets of London, history peers at us from every corner. Yet few people realize how close they are to the weird, wonderful, and sometimes terrifying history of medicine. Whether it's sipping lattes in Camden next to the very spot where the Black Plague broke out, or sauntering out of Tottenham Court Road Station only to find yourself face to face with the site of St. Giles Hospital for lepers. Centuries of medical history surrounds us. So let's go for a checkup. A few years back in time, down the murky Blackfriars Lane in the old city, and visit with our resident GP, Dr. Quack.
The following is based on a true story concerning the collapse of the Earl of Kent in 1702. Dr. Quack is attending a tribunal looking into his treatment of the Earl. All the medical procedures mentioned are real medical procedures used throughout history.
All rise for justice, justice!
Good morning, Your Honour. My name is Dr. Quack, and I was the physician present at the time of the Earl's collapse. May I just say, I don't want to overstep the mark, but I notice your eyes are a little swollen, Your Honour. I'm a bit of an eye expert. There's a quick fix to reduce the swelling. You'll kick yourself when I tell you the treatment. It's so obvious. As soon as you can, tie a live crab around your neck. Although, if it is more of a cataract, might be best to simply mix some honey with the ground up gallbladder of a hare and apply it to the eye with a feather. Certainly, Your Honour. I was just trying to help. Debbie, could you pass me my papers? That's correct. The Earl and I were playing bowls together. Yeah, I was just about to throw mine when the Earl collapsed. I thought he was doing a little prank to put me off, so I carried on and, I actually got an exceptionally good throw. I almost hit the Sorry, Your Honour. Yeah. Well, if I do say so myself, I'm pretty observant, and after checking my bowls throw, I was eventually alerted to the Earl's condition by the large crowd that had gathered around him, sobbing and screaming. Rushing over, I determined that he neither had a pulse nor was he breathing, which, medically speaking, is not ideal. But after smelling inside his mouth, the intense fishy odour gave me confidence there was still hope, but perhaps a smidgen of liver disease. Yes, and you'd be right. A less positive doctor may have given up right there and then, but I am not that doctor, Your Honour. Quick as a flash, I whipped out my fleam, sliced open the vein in his arm, and drained him of 1/2 pint or so of blood. Yeah, there was quite a lot of screaming at this point, but that is to be expected in the untrained. However, I believe that nerves were calmed with what happened next. Well, when removing a large amount of blood didn't work, everyone could see I was a highly skilled professional when I started jamming large clumps of snuff up his nose. That's right. He was still unconscious on the floor at this point. That's right. Not what you would call a pulse, no. Well, no pulse. So yeah, jammed a large amount of snuff up the nose and poured antimonial wine down his throat. Antimonial wine? Oh, it's an incredibly toxic brew meant to induce vomiting. I find if you can get a collapsed patient to vomit or sneeze, you're halfway there. No, he did neither. Yeah, things were not looking great, so I had him taken inside. He was obviously covered in tobacco and sticky wine at this point, not a pretty sight. So I did what anyone would do and sliced his other arm open and took a bit more blood, and then shaved his head. With my fleam, yes. Now, listen here, Your Honour. I'd shave a man top to toe if it meant saving his life. And I wanted to, but I was persuaded not to as time was pressing. Well, it had been about an hour since his heart had stopped, so we feared we might be losing him. So in the blink of an eye, I whacked a caustic plaster on his bonds. Oh, it's an extremely aggressive form of treatment. I was hoping that the violent blisters it caused would force out some of the toxins, but no luck. I was grasping at straws for ideas at this point, so I stripped him naked, gave him some buckthorn syrup designed to get a patient to thoroughly empty his bowels. I raised his legs above his head, held his ankles, thought of England, and waited for the show to begin. But alas, nada. No poo-poo. At this point, things were starting to look bleak. Well, Your Honour, picture this. You've got a noble of the realm lying naked as the day he was born, shaved like a pig, drained of 2 pints of blood, ankles round his ears, snuff up the hooter, mouth dripping wine and syrup, and covered in blisters. What would you do? Exactly. I plonked 2 red-hot frying pans on top of his head. Yeah, a lot of people were ready to give up at this point, but not me. I ordered him to his room, got him tucked up warm in bed, and then blew tobacco smoke up his anus. Oh, it's tried and tested. Dutch fumigation. I do it all the time. But nothing. So it was last chance saloon. Final throw of the dice. The bowels of a freshly killed sheep were wrapped around the Earl's abdomen. And again, we waited. And after 4 hours from the moment of his collapse, you'll never guess. He was dead. To be fair, he could have been dead right at the beginning. And if we're honest, had his heart been in a weakened state, any of the stuff I tried would have probably killed him. So, in summary, Your Honour, I think we can all agree that I couldn't have done any more.
Order in the court. Bailiff, bring the next one in.
Right, Debbie, go and hail a handsome cab. I feel like some dinner. Maybe crab.
And that was our appointment with Dr. Quack.
It's time to play Victorian parlor games. All games, from the Roman gladiatorial battles to a quiet round of cards or charades, are imitations of real-life situations. The activity of playing games is the expression of an instinct, for play is far older than culture, older even than prehistory. So here's our offering to you, a way to connect with your friends and family and have a bit of fun. Today, we introduce you to the very first Victorian parlor game I ever played. A few years ago, I stumbled upon Patrick Beaver's 1974 book, Victorian Parlor Games, in a discount bin outside a secondhand bookshop while wandering to a rehearsal. Immediately, I knew I'd found something special. A treasure trove of eccentric entertainment that could bond a cast faster than any trust fall. The book was full of bizarre and brilliant games requiring wit, composure, and just the right dose of theatrical absurdity. But one game rose above the rest and became the heart of our playful little troupe. Poor Pussy. Here's how it works. All players sit in a circle except one. That person becomes Pussy. Pussy crawls around on hands and knees and adopts their most pitiful, pleading posture at the feet of someone in the circle. Then they let out a sorrowful meow. The chosen player must look down and say, "Poor Pussy," in the most consoling tone they can manage, but without even the shadow of a smile. Pussy may repeat this pitiful exchange up to 3 times with the same person, trying new meows or even more woeful expressions each time. But after 3 attempts, if the chosen player does not break, Pussy must move on and try their luck with someone else. If the chosen victim cracks a smile, the 2 switch roles, and the player becomes the Pussy, and the Pussy joins the circle. The challenge of portraying a pitiful kitty cat while trying to make your friends and colleagues laugh, it became the stuff of legends in our rehearsal room, a truly joyful bonding experience. And once we'd exhausted every imaginable meowing style, we started improvising. We invented our own spins. Dashful dog. Silly salmon. Wistful whale. And even earnest elephant. Turns out the Victorians knew how to get a room laughing, and now, so do we. Well, that's our show. Thanks for joining us here at The Big Smoke. I hope something today sparked your curiosity, cracked a smile, or at the very least made you start to do some productive navel-gazing of your own. If you liked what you heard, share this episode with a friend, or we'd love for you to leave us a review on your podcast app of choice. Until next time, friends, we'll see you soon in The Big Smoke.